I'm Brian Winnekins at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention for Real Country 1430 WRDN. And thank you to our broadcast sponsors, including Growth Energy, also Pip Seeds, along with Dairyland Equipment Services, BASF, Ashley Gaussman, your agent in Northwest Wisconsin, and Annabis Silo. Joining us is Jay Truitt. A lot of folks maybe remember Jay from NCBA. He has his company now is Policy Solutions. We're going to talk a little bit about the election from Tuesday. And Jay, we had an event here at convention about the ramifications of this. Talk about some of the topics that were brought up. I know trade's obviously the big one.
Sure. Again, obviously trade probably is number one on a bunch of people's list. They've heard that we're going to still try to work our way through them. I think kind of the consensus of the panelists in the room were that maybe that there's not that kind of initiative yet ready in Washington, D.C. for people to work through trade. Obviously, the new administration is going to have a different take, and we're going to have to wait and see who's in charge, who's running what over at the U.S. Trade Representative's office and other places on the Hill. Above and beyond that, I think everybody is already looking forward to the next Farm Bill, trying to figure out how we lay the groundwork out for that. It's going to be some anxiety. There would be for anyone, so it's not unique to Mr. Trump. But just to see who he actually puts in place in the Department of Agriculture and other key places around town, I think pretty much defines how agriculture is going to view them from there on out.
Jay, I know that looking after the returns, and I mean, all of the polls were saying this wasn't going to happen. But when you look at, when you start to dig into it even a little bit, even early Wednesday morning when we recorded this, it seems like the farm vote is what really won the day for the Trump campaign, and that rural vote. Is this just a situation of the farmers in the rural areas saying we've had enough of, frankly, not being represented in D.C., and we're going to do something about it?
Yeah, I think largely I think it is a basis that the people that have been left out of all the other lists, right? It's kind of hard to identify the people that just live down at the end of Farm Road 151 somewhere, and they may or may not even be a farmer, but the truth is they do come from rural America, and that generally kind of represents a different set of values. Those values have been left off the plate for a long time, and they've been ignored for a long time. And this election just proves that we can count on them to actually come in and be a part of the system in the future.
Because of this election, at least on a nationwide basis, and I'm sure as someone over the years that's worked on policy and all of that, when we have these national elections, agriculture maybe gets a half a second. Rural issues get maybe another half a second, and that's it. After this election, is all of a sudden agriculture going to suddenly be, and rural issues move up a lot faster?
You know, I think the reality is, though, is that rural America actually shares a lot of basic values. We tend to have the same kind of feelings about guns. We have the same kinds of feelings about religion's place in our life. We have common values about property rights and over-regulatory environments, et cetera, and kind of the list goes on and on. I think if you go back and you look at the maps for the last 20 years, there's no surprise in the county-by-county maps and the way they looked this week. The problem is it's hard for those of us that work in Washington, D.C. We think we're the center of the world, not somewhere else. Well, the truth is what we found out is a bunch of rural counties out in places like Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida, and not so much Tampa and Miami and Chicago and New York City ended up being the centerpiece of what drives public policy.
I noticed last night when I was watching the returns, and obviously was very interested in Wisconsin, that it was the rural areas in Wisconsin, the Pepin counties where I'm at, and the Dunn counties, and those sort of things, where it was pretty obvious that that's what carried the day because of the turnout, and really for the Trump campaign.
Oh, absolutely. The turnout in rural America is what made the difference, plain and simple. And the reality is that shows you kind of how razor thin the divide is in America, because that probably really only represents a couple of percent, 2% of the total population base live out in the rural parts of the world. We all, for those of us that live out in rural America, you and the people that listen to you, we probably just don't really think about what a small percentage of the population we are. It looks like Donald Trump's going to end up with something like a 1% margin across the country nationwide, and that really is the difference between rural folks turning out and rural folks not.
And so I guess the next question is, how do we put everybody back together again? It's been an incredibly dirty campaign. Both candidates were very unpopular. A lot of people are just sick and tired of everything. They want Washington to at least work, and maybe Congress will get the message. But how do we is that the biggest concern, of bringing the rural folks to understand the urban folks? But on the same token, that can't be a one-way street. The urban folks got to take a step back and say, you know what? We got to remember, how do we bridge that divide? Because it is a big divide.
Yeah, I'm not for sure that I know the answer to that question. I do know this, though. Nobody wants Washington to work more, at least for the mechanics of the town to work. And that's really what has failed here. The mechanics of the town failed maybe when we look back on it now, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. It's before Obama, so we can't blame him and we can't blame George Bush. It is just one of those things where the system systematically begin to close in on itself. And I think until somebody can come in, hopefully one of the things that Mr. Trump can do is say, let's start over. Now, how do we go about passing a budget? How do we go about actually getting appropriations done in the way that we're supposed to do them? When should we do this farm bill? And if it's now, then let's get it done now, et cetera, et cetera. And I think when you go through issues on a regular order and everybody gets a time to understand them, I'm one of those people that actually believes that everybody is smart enough to understand the issues if they get a chance to actually hear them in more than a 10-second soundbite. They have to have a chance to actually, really understand what's going on, and people can make good decisions. When that happens, then that communication begins to take place back and forth between the various sides, and that's going to be the key at the end of the day. How do you make that happen? I don't know, but I do know that there's a hope that we get a chance to, for lack of a better way to say it, do a do-over here for a little bit, and hopefully the honeymoon lasts long enough for us to get some real progress done.
Fascinating night, Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. A lot of people still drinking a lot of coffee when we recorded this, and I think they will be for a while. Again, Jay, appreciate you joining us.
Oh, thank you so much.
Jay Truitt, we are at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention in Kansas City. I'm Brian Winnikins on Real Country 1430 WRDN.